There is a place in Africa where women do not bathe with water. Before getting married, they explore intimacy among themselves. And most surprising of all, the men are not jealous. This is not an ancient story. It is not a myth, nor is it an exaggeration. This exists, and it happens in one of the oldest tribes of humanity. What you are about to see does not appear in classic documentaries, is not taught in school, and is not often talked about. Let's enter the world of the Bushmen. In southern Africa, among the harshest deserts and savannas on the planet, lives a people known as the San. Although many call them Bushmen, they are hunter-gatherers, they have no cities, and they have no leaders, they have no wealth, and their way of life has hardly changed in thousands of years. But as you will see, they are surely much happier than many of us. Their DNA connects them directly to the first modern humans, but what makes them unique is not their antiquity. It is how they live today. Let's start with something that immediately strikes you. Here, women do not bathe with water. Neither do men. Not because they don't want to, but because water is too precious to waste on a shower. In the desert, water is not a luxury. It is the greatest of treasures, as it gives or takes life. That is why, for thousands of years, the San have developed a different way of caring for their bodies. Instead of showering, they cover their skin with a mixture of mud, animal fat, and fine sand. This way of washing with mud is not something occasional for them. It is something almost daily. In this tribe, women take off their clothes without shame, in broad daylight, and calmly apply the mixture, helping each other. There is no rush. There is no discomfort or awkward glances. As you will see on this trip among the San, the body is not hidden because there is nothing to hide. For the San, nudity does not have the cultural significance that it does for us. There is no provocation. There is no taboo. A body is not something to be hidden. It is simply a body fulfilling its function. That is why, when they apply this mixture, there is no shame or discomfort. Taking off one's clothes is not an intimate or transgressive act. It is part of daily care. The mixture they use has no ceremonial or symbolic name. It is not a sacred ritual. It is a practical solution. A combination of mud, animal fat, and fine sand that meets a basic need: survival. This mixture serves several purposes at once. It cleanses the skin without the need for water. It protects from the intense desert sun. It prevents insect bites. And it maintains the body's natural moisture for hours. For them, it is not mud. It is protection. It is hygiene. It is knowledge accumulated over thousands of years. What we would consider dirt is body care for the San. What we call primitive is efficiency for them. And perhaps that is the most profound difference between their world and ours. When the mud dries, the dirt comes off with it. The skin is left clean, protected, and covered with a characteristic reddish tone that many consider beautiful, but which is actually pure adaptation. It is literally a bath without water. This ritual is not experienced in private. It is shared. San women bathe together, talk, laugh, observe each other, and help each other. It is a time for body care, but also for social connection. From an early age, they learn that the body is not something to be ashamed of, that touching each other to clean themselves is not taboo, that showing themselves to other women is not a cause for guilt. This naturalness explains many other aspects of their culture. For example, their understanding of intimacy. When we talk later about how San women explore intimacy with each other before marriage, none of this happens in secret. It does not arise from prohibition. It arises from a healthy relationship with one's own body. For them, getting to know each other physically is not separate from daily care. It is part of the same learning process. While in our culture the body is often associated with shame, judgment, or constant sexualization, among the San the body is simply the body, an instrument for living, for working, for withstanding the climate, for relating to others, and that is why they do not feel the need to cover themselves out of modesty when they apply mud. That is why they do not have complexes like ours. And here we see a stark contrast with our way of life. We shower alone, behind closed doors. They care for themselves together, in full view of everyone. We hide our bodies, they understand them. And perhaps that is why, when we look at sand women, we do not see bodies that are ashamed or insecure. We see strong bodies, adapted to an environment that does not forgive mistakes. It is not a question of aesthetics, it is survival. A bath without water may seem strange to us, even uncomfortable. But in the world of the sand, it is not unusual. It is one of the reasons they are still alive. Now think for a second. Could you go weeks without showering like they do? Write it down below. We want to read your thoughts while the video continues. From a Western perspective, many consider these women among the most beautiful and athletic in Africa. Strong bodies, skin covered in reddish tones, agile movements. It's not aesthetics. It's adaptation to an environment that many of us couldn't endure for minutes. For them, every muscle, every gesture, and every step is the result of walking dozens of kilometers a day under the relentless sun. There are no gyms here. The body is forged by survival. And here comes something very different from our way of seeing the world. Their way of working. Anthropologists who have lived with the sand discovered that, unlike us, they do not spend their days working. Most spend only a few hours a day, often less than 2, hunting and gathering what they need. The rest of the time they do not produce, compete, or accumulate. They live. They rest, talk, care for children, repair tools, or simply observe their surroundings. For them, working more than necessary is not a virtue. It is a mistake. And now we come to one of the most delicate and least known aspects of sand culture: intimacy between women. Before marriage, in some sand communities, young women do not learn about intimacy with men in the same way as in most modern societies. Instead, intimate learning begins among women in the community itself, usually gradually, accompanied and without secrecy. These are not hidden encounters or forbidden practices, but an accepted tradition that is part of the maturation process. For these communities, intimacy is not seen as something shameful or sinful, but as another way of learning about the body, emotions, and mutual trust. Older women pass on practical lessons to younger women about body care, consent, pleasure, and respect, understanding that a woman who knows herself will be better prepared for a future relationship and for community life. From their point of view, these experiences strengthen the bonds between women and reinforce group cohesion. There is no idea of deviation or moral transgression, because their value system does not revolve around guilt, but around functionality and social balance. Female intimacy is experienced as a natural stage of growth, comparable to learning to hunt, gather, or perform spiritual rituals. An interesting curiosity is that many anthropologists have observed that this early education reduces later conflicts related to jealousy, frustration, or misunderstanding within the couple, as women enter marriage with greater emotional and bodily awareness. For them, the harmony of the community is more important than any rigid rules imposed from outside. And here an inevitable question arises for us. Would you have liked to grow up like this? Here, no one belongs to anyone. Jealousy, as we understand it, does not exist. Relationships are not based on possession, but on cooperation. The community comes before the individual. And this leads us to an uncomfortable question. Do you think it's normal to feel jealous? Or are we jealous because of the society we live in? If what you're hearing strikes you as shocking, strange, or even uncomfortable, leave a comment and subscribe to Uncensored World. You won't find videos like this anywhere else. Let's continue. Does this seem like freedom to you, or does it seem unthinkable? And remember, a like and a subscription help us continue to show realities that are not often told. Let's continue. You may be thinking something right now. If they don't bathe, do they smell bad? The answer surprises almost all visitors. No, the mud, grease, and plants act as a natural deodorant. The smell of the body mixes with that of the earth and smoke. It's not perfume and it's not soap. But it's not dirt either. It's another way of understanding the body. Scientists who have studied the sand discovered something fascinating. This mixture of mud and grease filters out much of the ultraviolet rays. It works like a natural sunscreen. Many believe that without knowing it, the Bushmen may have created the first sunscreen in human history. It is not a tribal legend. It is something that modern science has begun to study seriously. Thousands of years before, modern creams existed, but their bodies are not the only extraordinary thing about them. Their language uses clicks. Clicks that can indicate that they have found water, animals, danger, or the direction in which they want to move. A true human GPS. But in addition to that, these sounds can also express affection, closeness, and even desire or intimate interest. Without direct words, just tone, rhythm, and gesture. When we observe the Bushman's lifestyle from our modern perspective, the contrast is inevitable. We depend on constant water, soap, chemicals, strict routines, and clocks that mark every minute of our lives. Our hygiene, our relationships, and our time are organized around artificial norms that we rarely question. They, on the other hand, use mud, fat, and plants to care for their bodies, listen to the silence of the desert to orient themselves, and measure time not with clocks, but with sunlight, wind, and in what they call Nawara. Their survival does not depend on technology, but on cooperation, ancestral knowledge, and a deep understanding of their surroundings. While we rely on modern advances to protect us from the weather, stress, and disease, they have developed physical and cultural adaptations that have allowed them to survive for tens of thousands of years in one of the most hostile environments on the planet. It is not a better or worse life, it is simply another way of existing, based on priorities very different from ours. For many researchers, this is the key. They do not live more comfortably. They live with less anxiety, less stress, and less conflict. While we fight against time, they live within it. And then comes the big question, the one every viewer must ask themselves. Could you live without showering, without jealousy, live without a cell phone? Write it in the comments. Everything you've heard so far makes sense when you understand where they live. Because the sand's territory is not only dry and hostile, it is dangerous. In southern Africa, living with nature is not a metaphor. It is a daily condition. The sand share their environment with some of the most lethal animals on the African continent. But there are no reserves or fences. It is the same space where they sleep, walk, and raise their children. Venomous snakes such as the spitting cobra and the black mamba are part of the everyday landscape. Scorpions hide under the sand and among the rocks. Lions, hyenas, buffalo, and elephants roam the same territories as human families. But for the sand, the most dangerous animal is not the largest. It is the wounded animal. A wounded animal does not flee. A wounded animal attacks. And learning to recognize that can mean the difference between living or never returning to camp. This is where one of the most extraordinary skills developed by the sand comes in. In an environment where a misinterpreted footprint can mean death, the sand developed something that seems almost supernatural to us today. For them, sand is not just soil, it is their map. That's why a sand tracker can distinguish a footprint from hours or even days ago. They can tell what animal passed by, in which direction it was going, or whether it was walking calmly or fleeing. But that's not the most impressive thing. By observing an almost invisible footprint, they can tell if the animal is limping, if it is injured, or if it had young nearby. And that changes everything. An animal with young is extremely dangerous. An injured animal is unpredictable. A tired animal may attack before fleeing. This knowledge cannot be learned from books. It is passed down by walking alongside elders for years. That is why the sand do not need technology to find their way. The earth speaks to them. And that is why for decades scientists and modern armies have studied their tracking ability as one of the most accurate ever recorded. In a society where hunting is a matter of survival, you might think that the best hunter is the most admired. But here, the opposite is true. Among the sand, there is a practice known to anthropologists as insulting the meat. Insulting the prey. When a hunter returns with a large animal, no one celebrates. There is no applause. On the contrary, they joke. They say the prey was small, that the animal was sick, and in short, that it was no big deal. The hunter's ego is deliberately deflated. Why? Because for the San, ego is a greater threat than any wild animal. In a community without leaders, without hierarchies, and without centralized power, allowing someone to feel superior is opening the door to conflict, to domination, to violence. That is why individual success is immediately diluted in the group. The prey does not belong to the hunter. It belongs to the community. And the hunter is no more important than anyone else. This connects directly to something you already know and what is now coming. The San do not feel jealousy as we do. Because no one is above anyone else in the San's life, sharing is not a value. It is a rule of survival. Food is always shared, even when there is not enough. Tools are lent, space is shared, childcare is collective, and even sleeping together is common. Mats, skins, and huts do not belong to a single person. In many cases, different families sleep in the same space. For them, there is no obsession with privacy as we understand it. They have minimal clothing, and they don't care because the body is not something to be hidden. This helps to understand why possession does not matter here. Not with objects, not with people. They are called Bushmen because this name comes from the Portuguese term Bushmen, which literally means man of the forest. It was a name imposed by European settlers when they observed how this people walked for hours, traveling enormous distances through the interior of the African savanna. To them, that way of life seemed frozen in time. A people who traveled on foot through the desert as if they were still living exactly as their ancestors had thousands of years ago. And in a way, they were not wrong. It is believed that, as a general rule, a San man can travel more than 30 kilometers a day in search of water, animals to hunt, roots, and edible fruits. He does not do this for sport. He does it because every journey is part of his survival. Every step reinforces a knowledge of the terrain that is absolutely essential in such an extreme environment. A knowledge accumulated over generations, transmitted without maps, without books, and without technology. A knowledge so precise that to many observers, it seems like a superpower, because the San see maps where others see only desert sand. They know where there was water days ago, where an animal passed hours ago, which areas are safe and which ones hide danger, even though at first glance everything looks the same. But there is something important. Although the world knows them as Bushmen, they do not call themselves that. They prefer to call themselves San, a word that in their language simply means person or people, a name that reflects community, equality, and belonging to the land. This choice says a lot about how they perceive themselves. Not as men of the forest, isolated or primitive, but as a complete people, ancient and deeply connected to their environment. An ancient people who have survived for tens of thousands of years thanks to their ingenuity, resilience, and ancestral wisdom. Genetic studies confirm something extraordinary. The San lineage has undergone very little mixing with other human populations, making them a true living window into prehistory. Their DNA is one of the oldest known in modern humanity and connects them directly to the first Homo sapiens, the so-called original humans. This is an astonishing reality when we consider that the San are one of the few human societies to have survived for more than 40,000 years. While entire empires rose and fell, they remained. In the Kalahari Desert, one of the hottest, driest, and most hostile places on the planet, they did not survive through strength, nor through technology, and nor through armies. They survived through cooperation, constant adaptation, and a carefully maintained social balance. They have lived without agriculture, without states, without leaders. They did not build cities if they did not erect walls. They did not leave stone monuments. But they built something much more difficult, a way of life capable of preventing conflict before it arises. That is why they do not live more comfortably than we do. But they do live with less anxiety, less stress, and less violence. While we fight against time, they live within it. And perhaps that is why, after everything you have seen, The question is no longer whether we could live like them. The real question is whether our way of life is making us forget how to live. All this is not happening in an imaginary place. It is not a recreation. It is not a story lost in the past. The San people still live today in southern Africa, mainly in Botswana, one of the wildest and least understood countries on the continent. A land of endless deserts, untouched nature reserves, and communities that still live outside the rhythm of the modern world. And if you want to better understand the country that surrounds this culture, what Botswana is like today, and why it remains one of the most extreme and fascinating places in Africa, don't miss the video that follows. Click on it. Because understanding Botswana means understanding why the San people continue to live this way, and why the world is much more interesting and different than it seems.